typical in these respects. The articulation of Washington's unilateral right to resort to force in the Bush administration's national security strategy broke little new ground. Writing in Foreign Affairs before the 2000 election, Condoleezza Rice, for example, had condemned the reflexive appeal to notions of international law and norms, and the belief that the support of many states, or even better, of institutions like the United Nations, is essential to the legitimate exercise of power. The U.S. government need not conform to illusory norms of international behavior, she explained, or adhere to every international convention and agreement that someone thinks to propose. Clients and allies apart, all states, of course, must rigorously obey those norms, as the United States interprets them, or else. This stand has long been conventional, even at the liberal end of the narrow U.S. political spectrum. From the wise men present at the creation to the Clinton doctrine that the United States is entitled to resort to unilateral use of military power to ensure uninhibited access to key markets, energy supplies, and strategic resources. Taken literally, the Clinton doctrine was more expansive than Bush's 2002 national security strategy, which aroused fear and concern around the world, and immediately elicited harsh criticism from the heart of the foreign policy establishment. A response to the NSS in Foreign Affairs, for example, warned that Bush's new imperial grand strategy posed great dangers for the United States and the world. The more expansive Clinton doctrine, in contrast, was barely noticed. The reason was given by Clinton's Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who observed that every president has a position much like the Bush doctrine in his back pocket, but it is simply foolish to smash people in the face with it, and to implement it in a manner that will infuriate even allies. A little tact is useful. It is not good form to declare, "There is no United Nations." There is an international community that occasionally can be led by the only real power left in the world. That's the United States, when it suits our interests, and when we can get others to go along. Or perhaps it is good form. The words are those of UN Ambassador John Bolton. While his style is more offensive than most, Bolton was following the precedent of President Bush and Secretary of State Powell, who instructed the UN that it could be relevant by endorsing U.S. and U.K. plans to invade Iraq, or it could be a debating society. Amplifying the conclusion as she announced the Bolton nomination, Condoleezza Rice informed the world that through history, some of our best ambassadors have been those with the strongest voices. Ambassadors like Jeane Kirkpatrick and Daniel Patrick Moynihan. We need not tarry over Kirkpatrick's role at the UN, but Moynihan's is more interesting, since he gained much acclaim as a lonely and courageous fighter for the sanctity of international law, particularly during his tenure as ambassador to the United Nations, where he forthrightly condemned Idi Amin and defended Israel, acts that took real courage in New York. Moynihan deserves great credit for his work at the United Nations, Jacob Weisberg writes in a typical encomium, expanding on an earlier tribute to Moynihan's dedication to international law in the same journal. Unmentioned here and elsewhere are Moynihan's most significant contributions to international law as UN ambassador. No others begin to approach the success that he proudly recounts in his memoirs, rendering the UN utterly ineffective in whatever measures it undertook to deter Indonesia's invasion of East Timor, which, he observes in passing, killed 60,000 people in the next few months, going on to become perhaps the closest approximation to genocide in the post-World War II period. All of this proceeded thanks to the generous diplomatic, military, and economic support of the United States, joined by the UK as atrocities peaked in 1978, with France and others joining to gain what benefits they could from cooperating with the aggressors. Finally, under great international and domestic pressure, Clinton informed the Indonesian generals in mid-September 1999 that the game was over. They instantly withdrew, revealing with brilliant clarity just where responsibility lies for the crimes of the preceding quarter-century, to which Moynihan made a signal contribution, so he informs us. Rice's choices provide useful insight into what Bolton is expected to bring to the UN. Henry Kissinger described the Bush Doctrine as revolutionary, undermining the 17th-century Westphalian system of international order among the powerful, and of course subsequent international law. He approved of the doctrine, but with the standard qualifications about style and manner. He also added a crucial proviso. The doctrine, he said, must not be universalized. The right to use force at will, to be an outlaw state, must be reserved to the United States alone, perhaps delegated to its clients. As often, Kissinger deserves credit for his honesty and his understanding of intellectual opinion, which indicates no concern over such explicit demand for rights denied to others, rights with lethal impact in this case. Kissinger's assessment was confirmed again in 2004, when the press reported the release of tapes of Nixon-Kissinger conversations. Among them were Nixon's instructions to Kissinger to order bombing of Cambodia, as he did, with these words, "A massive bombing campaign in Cambodia. Anything that flies on anything that moves." One would be hard put to find a comparable call for monstrous war crimes, virtual genocide, in the archives of any state. It elicited no comment or reaction, as far as I could determine, even though the terrible consequences of those orders have long been known. Let us return to the Yugoslavia Tribunal, where Milosevic was charged with genocide. The indictment was restricted to crimes in Kosovo. It kept almost entirely to crimes subsequent to the NATO bombing, which, as anticipated by the NATO command and the Clinton administration, elicited serious atrocities in reaction. Presumably, because the Kosovo charges were so ambiguous, Bosnia was later added, specifically the charge of genocide at Srebrenica. That, too, raises a few questions, if only because, after these events, Milosevic was accepted by the United States and its allies as a partner for diplomatic settlement. A further problem is that the most detailed inquiry into the Srebrenica massacre by the Dutch government concluded that Milosevic had no connection to it, and that he was very upset when he learned about the massacres, the Dutch scholar who headed the team of intelligence specialists reported. The study describes the incredulity in the Belgrade government, including Milosevic, when they learned of the executions. Suppose we adopt prevailing Western opinion that such unwelcome facts are irrelevant. Even so, the prosecution has had considerable difficulty in establishing the charge of genocide. Suppose, however, that someone were to unearth a document in which Milosevic orders the Serbian Air Force to reduce Bosnia or Kosovo to rubble, with the words, "anything that flies on anything that moves." The prosecutors would be overjoyed, the trial would be over, and Milosevic would be sent off to many successive life sentences for the crime of genocide. A death sentence, if the tribunal followed U.S. conventions. But, as always, the principled exemption from moral truisms prevails. Precedents. Prevailing elite attitudes on the use of force receive instructive expression in scholarly literature. A leading U.S. historian, John Lewis Gaddis of Yale, published the first book to explore the historical origins of the Bush administration's preemptive war doctrine, which he basically supports, with the usual provisos about style, tactical flaws, and possible overreaching. The book was respectfully received in the scholarly literature, and was so popular in the White House that Gaddis was invited over for a discussion. Gaddis traces the Bush doctrine to one of his intellectual heroes, the grand strategist John Quincy Adams. In the New York Times paraphrase, Gaddis suggests that Bush's framework for fighting terrorism has its roots in the lofty idealistic tradition of John Quincy Adams and Woodrow